While there's nothing wrong with an undemanding movie that you can stop thinking about the second it's over, there's also nothing quite like a film that sticks around and sets up shop in your mind, lingering there for weeks, months, years, or even decades. Most of my brain power is devoted to movies, so to be honest, I'm thinking about films all the time, but there are a few out there that are particularly great at setting up shop in your noggin. I'm Ewan, this is What Culture, and here are 10 movies nobody could stop thinking about. Number 10, Under the Skin. Under the Skin certainly isn't a movie that'll work for everyone, but it is a movie that, well, has its title for a damn good reason. Jonathan Glazer's sci-fi film about an alien humanoid scarjo preying on men in Scotland is like no entry into the genre you've ever seen before. With brilliantly restrained detachment, Johansson expertly portrays a creature struggling to make sense of Earth and the strange people on it, while Glazer avoids most of the expected genre elements in favor of a more grounded, often horrifyingly realistic treatment. Number 9, The Fountain. Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain came and went in 2006 without making much of a dent, but over the last near 2 decades, its reputation has grown as one of the most entrancing and ambitious sci-fi films ever made. A mesmerizing exploration of grief and obsession, The Fountain may make for a confounding first sit due to its surreal, opaque narrative, but the stunning visual design, excellent performances from Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz, and Oscar-worthy score from Clint Mansell make it a movie you'll want to bathe in for a long time. Incredibly produced for only $35 million, Aronofsky employed practical macro photography techniques to avoid the high cost of traditional VFX, ensuring his film has a uniquely disarming aesthetic, quite unlike any other similarly themed sci-fi movie. Number 8, Mulholland Drive. David Lynch's magnum opus, the 2001 neo-noir fever dream Mulholland Drive will rattle around in your brain for weeks, months, or perhaps even years after you watch it. Lynch has shrewdly avoided explaining much at all about this materially strange mystery film, a sure work of 2 halves which, depending on your interpretation, may or may not inform one another. All the same, Mulholland Drive's startling array of imagery, from horrific to hilarious to sexy, leaves a deeply visceral impression of a filmmaker working at the untethered height of their powers and delivering precisely the art they envisioned. It's such a rich exercise in tone and mood that, once it's finished, you'll almost certainly want to watch it again to try and unlock its full meaning. Most of Lynch's films could be on this list, to be honest, but Mulholland Drive has sustained an unnerving, electrifying power quite unlike anything else in his filmography. Number 7, Memento. Christopher Nolan deploys a bewilderingly fragmented narrative structure to place audiences into the mindset of amnesiac protagonist Leonard Shelby, a fantastic Guy Pearce, in Memento, which, while arguably close to impenetrable on an initial viewing, builds to such a flabbergastingly unexpected payoff that you'll surely want to rewatch it as soon as possible. Nolan's career-long obsession with time and memory has never been more artfully explored than in this film. It'll make your head spin, but as you revisit it again and again, the story peels back layers to reveal added meaning you may have missed previously. With a production budget of less than $10 million, Memento confirms the enduring supremacy of ideas over money, and how all the effects-driven bombast in the world can't compete with a killer idea executed with real panache. Number 6, we need to talk about Kevin. There are horror movies, and then there's Lynn Ramsey's We Need to Talk About Kevin. An uncompromising adaptation of Lionel Shriver's novel, the film tackles a taboo subject rarely discussed cinematically or in real life: a mother failing to connect with their child. Tilda Swinton is breathtaking as the haunted Eva, a woman who reflects on a recent atrocity committed by her teenage son Kevin, played by Ezra Miller, and tries to reconcile the role her parenting may or may not have played in his act. Ramsey's film pulls no punches whatsoever in pondering the forces that drive a person, a child even, to psychopathic, murderous behavior, and how the parents of such individuals struggle to process this. Number 5, The Friends of Eddie Coyle. Peter Yates's The Friends of Eddie Coyle is one of the bleakest, most loneliest films I have ever seen, featuring possibly Robert Mitchum's greatest performance as the eponymous Eddie, and it's for that reason it won't leave your brain once you've watched it. Spoilers ahead for this entry too, obviously, so if you haven't seen the film yet and fancy checking it out for yourself, make sure to skip ahead to the next entry. Right, so for everyone who stuck around, The Friends of Eddie Coyle is a 1973 crime film starring Mitchum, Peter Boyle of Young Frankenstein fame, and Richard Jordan. Mitchum's Coyle is a gunrunner, a low-end member of the criminal element who is also informing against his associates for Jordan's Dave Foley, an ATF agent. Little does Coyle know that his superior, Boyle's Dylan, is also an informer for Foley. The film itself is the very picture of loneliness, with Mitchum conjuring an almost Johnny Cash in Hurt level of melancholy, as the net tightens slowly around him and he's left with a devastatingly ironic realization. Eddie Coyle has no friends. The ending of the film is an old-timer, this sucks conclusion. Dylan takes Eddie to a hockey game and gets him ridiculously drunk. Eddie is none the wiser, really, which emphasizes the tragedy we already know is coming. Eddie is about to be killed. I'm doing a rotten job of describing this, but honestly, the bit where Mitchum says, "Number 4, Bobby Orr," might just be the most devastating thing I've ever heard in context. He's a man already at the end, wistfully championing the idea of a future he doesn't know he won't see. And then the game ends, and he's shot while he's asleep in the car, and Dylan and Foley go on their merry way. Eddie's life not even an afterthought. It's brutally cruel, and that cruel tragedy is what will ensure Eddie Coyle, ironically, will live forever. Number 4. The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is one of the most perceptive and devastating films ever made about relationships. Filtered through the lens of a speculative sci-fi future where people can have memories of former relationships erased, director Michel Gondry and writer Charlie Kaufman dig deep into the inextricable connection between love, memory, destiny, and identity. It is fundamentally a movie that holds a mirror up to viewers and their own lived romantic experiences. And while that will certainly be uncomfortable for some, it is still a profound, primal piece of work that scratches away at the audience's own past while forcing them to consider their futures too. An Oscar-nominated Kate Winslet and an equally brilliant Jim Carrey deliver some of the finest work of their careers in a film that both mourns and celebrates the contradictory, paradoxical nature of human connection. Number 3. Hereditary. Even hardened horror fans were left positively shook by Ari Aster's directorial debut Hereditary, a film that's clearly about grief from its very opening scene, and yet confronts the subject in a soul-searing way just about nobody saw coming. The marketing sold Hereditary as a well-crafted horror film about a woman, Annie, played by Toni Collette, coming to terms with her mother's death, all while her home is assailed by an increasingly intense supernatural presence. Yet, the trailer quite ingeniously circumscribed the true tragedy of Annie's life, a horrific accident which occurs in the movie's first act and consequently offers it one of the most authentic depictions of traumatized grief cinema has ever seen. Toni Collette's bafflingly Oscar-snubbed performance in the lead role is mesmerizing, and Aster has such a confident handle on his movie's thickly anxiety-inducing tone that it's tough to believe he'd never directed a feature before this. Look, when it's all said and done, Hereditary is a movie that gets into your pores, enough that you'll literally want to shower it off you, or at least watch something totally frothy and disposable afterwards. Number 2. Arrival. Denis Villeneuve's Arrival was marketed as a seemingly typical alien invasion movie, and even with an expert filmmaker overseeing a killer cast, few could have anticipated what was lying in wait. Arrival is a film about humanity making first contact with extraterrestrials like no other, because rather than focus explicitly on digital creatures or an apocalyptic threat to Earth, it's really a movie about time. We think Arrival and its protagonist, Louise Banks, played by arguably a career-best Amy Adams, are dealing with one thing, when by film's end, we realize it's something else entirely. The concept of time is non-linear, and how we as people perceive it is central to Arrival's climactic emotional payoff, and comes as such a jaw-dropping surprise that it's sure to dominate the thoughts of anyone who watches it for a long, long time afterwards. Beyond that, there's something deeply life-affirming about its message and its protagonist's journey, to embrace pain and appreciate the joy that can also come along with it. Away from the aliens and everything else, it's a resoundingly grounded piece of humanist existential fiction. And number 1, Donnie Darko. For many young film fans growing up in the early 2000s, Donnie Darko was their gateway drug to less commercial, arguably more challenging genre films that didn't simply spoon-feed audiences their narrative. Like other films on this list, Donnie Darko wasn't really meant to be fully understood in an initial viewing, but the uniquely weird and off-putting mood, sharp dialogue, and brilliantly unnerving lead performance from Jake Gyllenhaal combined to make Donnie Darko a heady trip like few others. Once the film arrives at its elliptical ending, the story continues to live on in the viewer's head as they ponder the finer details of its confusing yet enticing story. And like any good mystery movie, Donnie Darko is a cinematic puzzle you'll probably want to keep returning to, and whether you first saw it as a kid or an adult, it's a movie that sticks firmly to the ribs, continuing to thrive in our collective subconscious over 2 decades since its release. And those were 10 movies nobody could stop thinking about. This is obviously quite a broad topic, so I know there'll be loads here I didn't get to talk about. However, that's a great excuse for you to fire your suggestions down to the comments below. Be sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want more. Either way, thank you all for watching. I've been Ewan, this is What Culture, and I'll hopefully catch you next time. Bye!